Good evening to everyone, and welcome to yet another night here at the State House Conference Room. As we know, electoral reform has been a big talk here in Dominica. We now get ready for night two of the public consultations. We now go across to Foreign Affairs Minister for the prayer.
Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Honorable Roosevelt Skerrit, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Dominica and political leader of the Dominica Labour Party, Honorable Members of Cabinet, Honorable Jesma Paul Victor, Leader of the Opposition, Honorable Anthony Charles, Parliamentary Representative for the Marigot constituency, Observers Justice Raphael Misaga from the Commonwealth Secretariat, Ms. Meline Glean of the Organization of American States, Mr. Dwight Lay of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Mr. Sas Gunraj of Karen Prevost, Secretary to the Cabinet, Permanent Secretaries, Dr. Kenneth Daru, Special Envoy in the Office of the Prime Minister with responsibility for electoral modernization, Mr. Duncan Stewart, Chairman of the Electoral Commission, Executive Members of the Dominica Labour Party, Mr. Carlos Charles, Leader of Team Unity and other members of Team Unity, Mr. Nicholas George, General Secretary of the United Workers' Party and other members of the United Workers' Party, Mr. Bernard Ito, Political Leader of the Dominica Freedom Party, who's joining us via Zoom, and other members of the Dominica Freedom Party, independent candidates from the 2022 general elections, all other invited guests, members of the media, good evening. I wish to welcome you to night two of the consultations on electoral reform. We heard from members of the legal fraternity yesterday evening, and we will hear from politicians and political parties this evening. I am pleased that you accepted the government's invitation to be here and to share your views on a matter of extreme national importance. The issue of electoral reform has been on the agenda for many years now, and we now have the opportunity to comment on an independent report on the electoral modernization of Dominica's electoral process. The report that was prepared by Sir Dennis. It is presented in two parts, Phase 1 and Phase 2. The report has been widely circulated by the government. Some of you received printed copies on the 21st of June. Others would have accessed it on the government website. The report contains Sir Dennis's recommendations on several issues and includes draft bills and regulations to give effect to his recommendations. Dennis was engaged by the government in carrying out his assignment. The process was managed by the Electoral Commission, and Sir Dennis has clearly the report is independent and impartial, and that he executed his duties without fear or favor. I also think it is important to note what was stated in the Commonwealth Secretariat election, and I quote, "No country has a perfect electoral or democratic system, and no election management body is beyond review or criticism. Are always a work in progress," end quote. So this is a work in progress for Dominica. The Prime Minister indicated that he would hold a series of public consultations to receive feedback on the report and the draft legislation, and this will continue over the next few weeks. I wish to also especially welcome tonight the representatives from the Commonwealth Secretariat, the OAS, CARICOM, and the OECS, who are observing and participating in this consultation process. Present with us is Justice Raphael Misaga from Kenya, representing the Commonwealth, Ms. Meline Glean from the OAS, Mr. Sas Gunraj representing CARICOM, and Mr. Dwight Lay from the OECS. Welcome and thank you for being here with us. As you deliberate tonight on the electoral report, you have the opportunity to shape what our electoral landscape will look like for the foreseeable future. You most likely will not agree on everything, but perhaps through dialogue we can agree on some key matters that can collectively be taken forward to advance, modernize, and improve our electoral process. Attorney General Mr. Levi Peter to give a brief overview of the report and the recommendations, and then we will open up the floor for your feedback, comments, clarifications, and suggestions. Attorney General, the floor is yours.
Just to let our listeners and viewers know that you can catch this live on our Facebook.
Other guests and attendees, good evening to all. I will try to take note of the slight hint that I was given that it's brief and try to make it as brief as possible. But at the same time, doing justice to the overview. I should start by saying that this presentation, as all of the presentations that will be made during the course of these consultation draft legislation, and to highlight significant areas of proposed change to Dominica's electoral system. The presentation is not intended to be a comment of the government. The intention is to seek to give an outline, as certainly I'm presenting it, so as I see it, and of course you may have a different view, and of course if you do, you will operate on that view. The report was submitted in two phases. Phase one focuses, according to Sir Dennis, on cleansing of the voters list, with emphasis on voter identification and the voter registration system, and includes a legislative framework which is comprised of two bills, namely the Registration of Electors Act of 2023, which I will henceforth refer to as the new Registration of Electors Act, and the Registration of Electors Regulations 2023. Structurally, the report, according to Sir Dennis, sought to address in the second phase, one, the electoral process, primarily access to the media and campaign financing. Two, the Electoral Commission, several components there, the composition, financial autonomy, staffing, appointment of committees, resignation procedure, and protection from suit. And the third is new legislation. So Dennis, with his report, submitted 4 pieces of draft. Essentially, the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023, House of Assembly Elections Regulations 2023, Electoral Commission Bill 2023, and the House of Assembly Elections Petitions and Rules 2023. So, phase one. Phase one of the report, the Registration of Electors Act, the new REA, substantially reflects the existing Registration of Electors Act and is intended to repeal and replace the existing Act. The most significant parts of the proposed new REA, from a reform perspective or a modernization perspective, are parts 3 and 5, I would suggest, which introduce new concepts and provisions intended to give effect to the report's recommendations in relation to the registration of electors. So part 3. Part 3 sets out a number of issues and requirements which must be satisfied in order for a person's name to be entered or remain in the register of electors. These verification requirements include the following. 1, residency, registration, 3, ID cards, 4, investigation, and 5, confirmation. Residency there are 2 distinct components to this. One relates to a person's entitlement to be registered to vote, and the other relates to the circumstance in which a person is deprived of his entitlement to remain registered and to vote. Component 1 is provided for in Clause 7.1c of the new Registration of Electors Act and requires that the persons applying for registration must have been resident in the pool. Other component, however, does, and it is, in my view, a significant component and a significant consideration for this proposed bill, and it proposes a dramatic change to the existing situation and definition of absent from Dominica. Clause 26.1 states, having been absent from Dominica for the purpose of Section 12.1b, 13.4b, or 15.3b, if in the 5 years preceding the date of the last publication of the Register of Electors, the person visited and remained in Dominica for a period of at least 90 or alternatively 50 days for the periods amount at least once within the 5-year period that we're referring to, he or she is entitled to remain on the register and to be able to cast a vote. This absence from Dominica point. Section 26.1 would abolish the existing right, as I've just said, and replace it by the 90 or 50-day requirement. The person would have to spend in Dominica so as to continue to enjoy the benefit of being registered, and that would be reflected at Clause 12b, removed from the register in accordance with the new Clause 13.4b and 15b. Sorry, 15.3. Residents. In relation to registration, the proposed drafts do not significantly amend the existing position. There are two aspects in which it amends the existing provision. One is in relation to providing that 17-year-olds will be actually be placed on the register until they attain the age of 18 years of age. And the second is that state employees stationed overseas, example, diplomats and staff of diplomatic embassies and so forth, would be deemed to reside at a particular address, provided they had given prior notice of that declaration to the chief registering officer. The third element is identification cards, which would go towards verification. And the recommendation of Sir Dennis is for the mandatory use of what's described in the report as national identification cards for the purpose of voting. This is to be found at Clause 11 of the new Registration of Electors Act. The fourth element of verification is investigations, and that has three components, I suggest. One is increased discretion to the chief registering officer and the electoral officials. That's addressed at Clause 9 of the new provisions. It also would provide at Clause 9.5 for a new offence, namely, the element is the increased investigatory powers that Clause 10 will provide to the chief registering officer and the staff or the official electoral seek information by way of investigation than they currently have on the wording of the existing legislation. And the third is a requirement that's proposed that public officers would be obliged to provide information to the chief registering officer. And two of those officials, just to mention, there are several, but just to mention two. One is the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who would be required to provide details to the chief. Names of every person who is in service overseas, who is a registered elector or eligible to be so, and thirdly, every person within. The second official is the chairman of the Mental Health Review Board, who will be required to provide the name, street address, date of birth, and occupation of as having a mental disorder as defined by the Mental Health Act. And of course, there are dates provided by which those officials would have to do so. There are also requirements for the Commissioner of Police and other accurate under the provision that I've just referred to, one of the officials who shall provide information as per the draft is the Commissioner of Police. That obviously is a matter which may be discussed further in the consultation. And finally, insofar as verification is concerned, but certainly on the recommendation, it provides for confirmation of registration, and that's at Part 5, clauses 50 to 56. And that would entail people who are actually on the register of electors having within a stipulated time frame that would be set out by the Commission would have to confirm their registration so as to remain on the register of electors and not have their names removed. That's an interesting new provision, and I'm sure that will form some part of the discussion. Moving to Phase 2. Phase 2 of the report, Dennis described as primarily seeking to address institutional matters. I've already indicated the 4 pieces of legislation that underpin that Phase 2, and the institutional matters to which Sir Dennis referred primarily are: 1, access to the media, which is addressed at Part 3 of Phase 2, more specifically Clause 50, use of electronic voting systems, which is addressed at Part 4, campaign financing, which is addressed at Part 7. So then it's also addressed the issue of the Electoral Commission, to the point that he makes various proposals in the report, and those proposals are reflected in the draft. That would be a new innovation in terms of legislating for it, and it would require, if Sir Dennis's proposals are adopted, that independent candidates to have access to state-owned media during the campaign period. And it's notable that that is state-owned media and not private media, perhaps for a fairly obvious reason. The second element is at Part 4, which is the electronic voting system. That is, as the name suggests, fairly straightforward. So Dennis proposes that, subject to a number of conditions being met and the satisfaction that the equipment is, electronic voting systems should be used for the purposes of elections in Dominica. Thirdly, the issue of campaign financing, which is at Part 5, and that's covered in clauses 54 to 75 of the House of Assembly Elections Act 2023. Largely, clauses 54 to 63 deal with campaign contributions. 65 deal with campaign expenditure. Clauses 66 to 75 deal with miscellaneous matters such as submission of reports, audited returns. It is notable that the proposal also carries with it the recommendation that there be various offences which would attract 12 months imprisonment in relation to the Clause 53 offence, to $10,000 or months imprisonment for the Clause 70 offence. So finally, the Electoral Commission, the report recommends, as I've indicated, changes to be made and the enactment of the Electoral Commission Act. And that really, the Act really refers, financial autonomy is referred to at Clause 12, the fund, and administration of the fund. It also proposes a certain autonomy to the Commission in relation to the appointment of staff. It also or committees, also the Chief Elections Officer and any employee of the Commission, if they have any private interest in a matter which is under consideration. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. That is the end of my contribution.
Thank you very much, Attorney General. You would have heard a synopsis of some of the key points arising from the report of Sir Dennis. Some of you may have very strong views on what is in the report or what ought to be in the report. You will all have the opportunity to share your views and perspectives on this and to say what you would like to see taken to Parliament to modernize our electoral process. When you take the floor, please indicate who you are, and if you are speaking on behalf of a party, please indicate which one, and then make your comments. I ask that we all respect each other's point of view, and we allow people to share their views uninterrupted. The sessions are being recorded, so you will not see me taking copious notes, but the transcribers are taking note of all of your points. If you have a prepared response, you are welcome to come to the podium to deliver it, or you can remain in your seat if you wish, and there's a roving mic that will be brought to you so that you can provide your comments. To those who are joining us online, they can raise a virtual hand so that they can make their intervention as well. So I would, without further ado, I would declare the floor open. So anybody who wants to share, they're welcome to do so now. Anybody wants to start the ball rolling? Okay. Okay. Would you like to speak from here? Sure. Thank you.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Honorable Jessup Paul Victor, Leader of the Opposition. Protocol has already been established. I'm also delighted that we have in our midst at this time officials from the Organization of American States, the Commonwealth, and the Caribbean Community. This report by Sir Dennis Byron incorporates many of the recommendations your organizations have made over the last 4 election cycles, 2009, 2014, 2019, and 2022. This report by Sir Dennis Byron is an improvement on Dominica's existing electoral laws. It would further strengthen our electoral system. It is my sincere hope that this consultation exercise is not just a public relations activity, but an opportunity for all stakeholders and the Dominican populace as a whole to reach a consensus on the best way forward for electoral reform in Dominica. Further, I endorse fully an idea put